And once again, I want to welcome you to our Masters MTA-207 Designing for Data. This is our Masters Technology Architect event. And we would like to introduce to you our amazing presenters we have for you today. We have the wonderful, charming, debonair, and dapper Mr. Matt Olsen. He's our technical director from Crestron Southwest. We have our phenomenally talented Mr. Tim Goosens, who manages our Fusion support group in EMEA. They will be your instructors for the course. Of course, I'm your co-host, Richard Sasson. I'm the Global Director of Technical Services. We are really excited about this presentation. We're going to start with some basics, and we're going to go into a lot of depth later into the course. This is building on many of the other courses you have attended previously. So get ready. I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions, but give us time to get into the presentation a little bit, as many of your questions will get answered as we go further and further in depth in the classes. Having said all that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Matt Olsen. Matt, why don't you take us on a road for designing for data?
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate that. Welcome, one and all, from around the world. It's great to have you here. I really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. I just want to set the stage a little bit for what we're going to be talking about today and how we're going to do it. This is a high-level course, so we're going to start really high level. We're going to sell the concept of doing what we're doing, right? And then we're going to drill down. So as Rich mentioned, we are going to get into some pretty meaty specifics and technical jargon, if you will, a little bit later on. But it is a tight scope. So as you know, if you've never heard anything about Fusion or Xio, welcome. We're going to give you a pretty good idea what they're about in terms of data. If you have, you know that those tools do a lot of things, right? They're like Swiss Army knives. We have Fusion. Some people use 2 components out of the 6 things it does. Xio, some people use 2 things out of the 4 things, 6 things it does. Okay, what we're going to be focused on here today is the data part of those tools. Okay, so there are I do recommend that you look into these tools in greater depth and detail, especially Xio, because in terms of a management platform, it is fantastic. But we are really just going to be focusing on the data end of it today for the scope of this course. Okay, we're going to spend some time on some theory up front. This is about today. All right, so we're talking about tools that you can take and design systems with right now. I'm not going to get too caught up in what's going to be available in a year from now. It's about tools that are available today. And in fact, many of these tools have been available for many, many years. Why we're talking about it today, it's the context of the world. Data is critically important these days. We are seeing more Fusion deployments now that we have in a long, long time. And this tool has been around since, what do we say, Rich, like 2003, when it entered the world as RoomView.
Yep.
We now call it Fusion. So these tools are not new. In fact, they're very mature, okay? But in the context of today, they are increasingly important, and we'll explain some reasons why. We'll use some tools generically. I might say workers, I might say workplace, but you can think of these as interchangeable with parishioners in a church or patients in a hospital, students and a campus. Really, we're talking about users. Really, at the end of the day, we're talking about users. So you can apply these concepts from enterprise to all other kinds of use cases. All right, and fundamentally, this is about what we're hearing from end users. Everything that you see here today is based on what we see end users wanting when we get in front of the right audience. We'll talk a little bit about that too. And finally, every organization is different. What works for one organization may not work for another. Now we have some standard baselines that we're going to encourage you to start with, which kind of capture the 90th percentile use cases. But fundamentally, every organization is going to have different sets of values with the data that's available to them. So with that, just kind of running through today, we're going to talk about what's the point of all this, right? What is the big picture? We're going to talk about turning data into information and intelligence, actionable information, right? So we're going to talk about the little bit difference between raw data and information that we can actually use. We'll talk a little bit about the types of data, and it's important to keep in mind that that is within the context of what we're talking about here, right? Data can mean a lot of things. It can mean ones and zeros coming from a Blu-ray player and being transmitted across a network. Okay. What we're talking about today is really usage data, right, and how the space is utilized. We will get into those burning questions of XIO versus Fusion. I can't tell you how many times I get that question. That really is probably the biggest burning question anytime I have any sort of XIO or Fusion conversation. What is the differences between them? How do I pick? We're going to talk about how we present data as information. So the conversion process of taking raw data and visualizing it as usable information. We'll talk about identifying the customer need, the interview process, and we'll give you some design guidelines, some tools, some resources, and some sample programming scopes of what those look like. And finally, we'll wrap up at the very end with a little peek into the future and what's in store for some of these tools. So with that, I'd like to ask a poll real quick. Will you throw up that first poll, Rich?
You bet, Matt.
Do you currently design for data? Yes, no, sometimes. And this is just based on what we've talked about so far with what data is. Really interested to see the responses here.
Okay, we're going to let that go for about about a minute or so. And it's interesting, you know, you're talking about designing for data. And one of the things that we did with this class is we included more data analysis in terms of our polls. So we're going to ask as part of the class for you guys to be involved and engage with more polling and more information to share with us and help us ask our questions and answer our questions. It's a great thing. We would love to see your responses, so please take the time, fill out the polls. I don't want to take away too much time from the class, but we are going to wrap this one up in about 10 seconds. So we're looking forward to it. There are 1,252 people in today's session, so we're really excited about that. And it's a good thing. So I'm going to wrap up the poll here, and I'm going to share some results with everybody. So it's kind of interesting here, Matt. If you'll notice, we see here sometimes is 41%, yes is 27%. So combined, we're at 68% involves some level of data in their design, yet 32% don't do any design.
That's interesting, and hopefully we will, convey to you some reasons why you might want to consider this, because it really is about expanding our scope, which kind of leads us right into what we're going to talk about now. We are in the AV industry, and what that means has certainly evolved over the past decades, right? We're talking about, went from simple, slide projectors to then controlling the slide projectors, then moving video around, and then adding automation into the mix and some environmental controls. So we certainly have expanded over the years what AV means. And I encourage you to continue to challenge what that means in the future. For instance, one of Crestron's fastest growing categories is scheduling. Is that AV? How about reporting whether a room is occupied or not? Is that AV, right? So the definition of what AV is certainly continues to evolve. And I encourage you to think about it beyond the box, beyond moving ones and zeros around. All right, take what you already do so well and expand it. Look around. What else can we do here? And the good news is you're already poised to be the richest source of data in the space. Think about the number of touch points that you have in those rooms, right? We've got video inputs that we can monitor and track. We've got display usage. If we've got hooks into occupancy, that's rich data. What about scheduling? Another rich source of data. And when we start combining those things together, we get really useful information, okay? In addition to thinking beyond the hardware box, start thinking beyond the meeting room space, right? Scheduling panel kind of put us out into the hallway. What about cafeterias and lounges and informal collaboration spaces, right? Start thinking about ways that we can offer value to your customers by providing useful information for them. As I mentioned before, Fusion is more popular than ever, and the reason is metrics, right? Metrics fundamentally starts with data, becomes information in the form of metrics. Metrics are driving the world today, and it's becoming more and more critical for organizations to use their facilities more efficiently. Ultimately, it's about telling stories, and really what I mean by that is illustrating the story. And when you make a case for justifying new technology or upgrading technology or adding meeting rooms or expanding real estate, we need some stories to help justify those expenditures. And you'll be asked to show the data. So in this class, we're going to talk about what showing the data means. Does it mean providing a list of numbers? Not really. It means showing it in a visually articulated way. As I mentioned before, if we look into the spaces that we are in today and look at the types of touch points that you have, you're already there, right? It's just a matter of knowing where to look, right? And fundamentally, we have to write it down. If we have all of this data pouring out of these rooms that we don't funnel into any place to write down so that we can look at it later and analyze it later, it's gone. It's vaporized. We can't use it later. So that's really what this is about, right? Is taking that data that already exists and writing it down fundamentally. And what can we find out about these spaces when we start doing that? Technology preferences, right? We can understand if users prefer to use wireless presentation or plug in an HDMI cable. You know, do they prefer the input at the front of the table versus the back of the table? Why, right? What about room type preferences? You might find that certain spaces are being booked more than others. With similar technological capabilities and similar seating capacities and arrangements, why are some spaces being booked more than others, right? That helps facility managers run their spaces more efficiently. You might find that certain spaces are booked more aggressively on the west side of the building in the morning and on the east side of the building in the evening, right? We can probably infer that that's because it has to do with some sunlight issues, right? Maybe there's an opportunity to add some window treatments, but that may or may not be the case. But the point is, it gives us the opportunity to ask why, right? That can only be done if we have the data. What about inferred data? Inferred data isn't actually direct data. It's not literal direct data, but it can be data that's inferred from something else. For example, you notice a trend that was unexpected about a technology space. For instance, you noticed that the flip top closest to the door in the standard room types was used most frequently. Why? Right? Why is the flip top on the left-hand side of the table used more than the flip top on the right-hand side of the table? Maybe it's because it's closer to the door, but when we start asking questions and digging into it, we find out that it's actually because there's a charger in that flip top, right? So now there's an opportunity. Maybe they need more charging opportunities in these spaces. So it's about iterative design, but if you don't have the data in front, you can't use that data to form information for the future. So what is the point? What is the big point? It's ROI. That stands for return on investment. What are the investments? Physical real estate for your end users is a huge expenditure. Workers are a huge expenditure. The technology that supports those spaces is a significant expenditure, right? So it's all about showing the return on those investments. And I'm asking you as a specifier and designers to stand out from the crowd, right? Make yourself something more than a limited scope of moving the AV around. You have the opportunity to be a true solution provider and form some long-term relationships. Now, instead of just providing a functional solution, you're providing information that these organizations can use to operate more efficiently. Said another way, you have workers or users and you have infrastructure, right? And where they meet in the middle is where the users use the infrastructure to collaborate, to produce. The people drive the business, facilities exist to give those people a place to produce. That intersection is where we operate. So we are really poised to be the solutions provider to offer the information needed to make these spaces operate more efficiently, okay? But how do we design the best workplace technology for a given organization? How do we even know what's best for particular workers? I'm sure you've all had conversations like that in the past, right? They don't know what they need. They maybe have some idea of what they've done in the past. Maybe it's an upstart company and they've moved from just a basic cable on a table plugged into a display to something a little more sophisticated in a larger space, and they're calling on your expertise to help get them going. What do we start with, right? They don't really have any history to draw upon. So we start with some baselines, right? You use your expertise and what's worked best for other organizations like them, because that's a best guess, and that's a great place to start, right? But if we don't build in data up front, what are we going to do for the next time, right? When they're looking to improve iteratively over time, that's where the data comes in super, super helpful, okay? I recently worked with a local utility, and they happen to have the facility manager in the conversation. And as soon as we started talking about things like metrics and data, their ears perked up, right? They're thinking all about this. And of course, it's a utility, so if anyone knows anything about visualizing data and tracking metrics and trends, it's a utility. So their ears perked up. So they built in some standard baselines, and that informed the equipment that had to go in there. Because if the equipment couldn't tell us what it was doing, then there was no data from which to draw upon. So that actually got more useful equipment up front that could tell us what it was doing. In this case, it happened to be Crestron. As you know, Crestron gear is we're feedback freaks, right? We want to know what's happening all the time. That translates into data, okay? Here we are several years later, several iterations later, and they're working on that data to understand how people are using these spaces to know. Maybe we don't need as many large conference rooms. We need more mid-sized spaces, because the large conference rooms are being booked over and over and over again, but it's really because we didn't have enough mid-sized conference rooms. The large conference rooms weren't filled to capacity. They were filled to a mid-sized conference room capacity, so that informed them that the real estate spend needed to be adjusted to more accommodate how their users were using the spaces, okay? And Tim, I'd like to ask you a question. What happens when the fundamental baseline data, the foundational data, is not set up correctly in the first place? How hard is it to go back and change it after the fact?
Actually, quite some work, Matt. I remember this one project where we were contacted recently. The requirement of the client was actually pretty straightforward. There was reporting needed regarding occupancy of the rooms, just pure occupancy. Are people actually physically in the room, yes or no? Now, this requirement wasn't really included in the very beginning in the design of the system. And what happened is all of the rooms had different types of occupancy sensing hardware. And the programming that was done to the rooms didn't include, in most of them at least, didn't include any type of gathering this information and sending it over, in this case, to a Fusion system. And the little data that was available in Fusion, the client had to generate 3 different reports actually to get the data out of the system. And in this case, we had to go back and looked at each individual room, looked at the available hardware, what were the options to get the occupancy sensing into the program, and then each and every single program had to be adjusted. So the programs would send that occupancy data to Fusion, in this case, in a unified way. So it was a huge effort to actually meet a very basic requirement, just because it wasn't really included in the initial specification. So it's definitely worth sitting down with the client and making sure all of the requirements are covered up front.
Hey,
That's
Tim.
a great point.
Oh, sorry to cut you off there, Matt. But Tim, are you going to tell us a little bit later about some really good documentation people could use to help address that problem?
Yes, indeed, because we actually do have quite a lot of good documentation, but I think not a lot of people are aware of it. So we're going to spend some time during presentation later on to cover some of these documents and to basically make them available and show all the resources that we have available, because we have all the tools for everyone to be successful in their designs and in their conversations when they're making the system design. So definitely, yes.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Fantastic.
So, Rich, at this time, is there any Q&A we'd like to take on so far?
Yeah, there's an interesting one because it wasn't something I think we're spending much time on, but it's a really good question. One of our customers would like to know the possible to discuss the residential concepts of designing for data and how would that come into play. So it's a really pretty cool thing. And I think one of the things that we also need to discuss with the team, and we're going to get to it, is how reporting with business intelligence is going to be critical. But I think the residential possibilities is a really interesting conversation to discuss.
It sure is, and as we go through this conversation today, it should become fairly apparent, you know, what is required to go into the system in order to get the information out of the system. But the reality is there are some residences or customers that have multiple residents that really do operate like an enterprise. And I have seen Fusion deployed in those types of situations. So you know, all of these use cases, examples, and concepts could certainly be applied to a situation like that. Thanks for that. So moving on, I do want to define data and information just in the context of what we're talking about here. And context is going to be kind of a reused word here because really everything is about context. And the flow that we're talking about today, right, is this, right? You start with equipment. Equipment feeds data into some analytical engine, and that spits out information. And we'll illustrate that a little bit more clearly, right? But fundamentally, the equipment is our I/O to the world, right? That is what tells us what's happening in the physical world that we can then get that data out of and turn into useful information. But in terms of deciding which equipment to use, we kind of have to begin at the end with what information do we want to get out of this thing? And what information do we want to get out of this thing will help define what equipment sits up front in the first place to give us the data that we can then parse and analyze to get to the information. So said another way, there is no information without analytics, there's no analytics without data, and there's no data without equipment, okay? But the design process kind of works backwards, right? We're gonna start at the end with information, understand what information we wanna get out of it. If we don't know, we start with some baselines, and we'll talk about that later. And then, of course, when it's deployed, the information or the data flow is from the equipment back up, okay? So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, that we are starting with the end. We're starting with where we want to get to, and then we can chart the path to get there. So a little bit about data versus information, okay? And information, you can use analytics, you can use metrics. In the context of what we're talking about, those are kind of all the same thing. But data is just a value, right? And it has meaning, but its meaning is distilled in context, right? What does it mean? If I just look at a list of occupied, not occupied, occupied, not occupied, not occupied, occupied, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything unless I know which room it is and what time those things happen. Now, when I can juxtapose that raw set of data against a clock and location where it is, now there's actual meaning. That's information that I can use, right? So what we're looking at here is just a snippet of a database, right? It's just values, right? And if I'm an expert in whatever those numbers mean, I could probably distill some meaning from those. But if I'm not an expert in poring over a database and raw values, I probably want to see it visualized, okay? And the neat thing about visualization is that it can communicate so much information so quickly. And for the purposes of this class, we're really slicing data into two really key types. One of them is monitoring and real-time data, things that I can take action on right now, right? Something is offline, I need to respond. Or someone's got a help request, I need to respond. That's like real-time, right now data that I can use to take action on, versus historical data. And we're actually going to spend the bulk of our time today talking about the metrics and historical data, because that's the part that, frankly, has the most opportunity to get deployed more out in the world, okay? Monitoring real time, everyone gets that. I want to see when stuff happens right now and respond to it. Everyone gets that, but planning for the historical data is truly where there's value when it comes to planning the next thing, okay? And so we also have to keep in mind who our audiences are. In monitoring in real time, it's usually going to be the people on site, right? The people who can actually respond to those that information. Also users, end users can also take advantage of real-time data in terms of what space is available, right? That can be based on calendaring booking. It can be based on occupancy. It can be based on both, okay, even better. So users can definitely take action on right now real-time data. Okay, in terms of historical data, it's usually going to be people involved with designing, specifying, authorizing, and spending money for these new spaces. So what is the path to take data and turn it into useful information? It's math, right? It's kind of a two-step process. Analytics just crunches the numbers. Sometimes it's just sorting the numbers. Sometimes it's applying math, comparing it to something else, giving us percentages. That's really how you know when you're talking about aggregate data versus analytic data. And Tim's going to go into a lot greater detail about this, raw data and aggregate data versus produced analytics that are actually useful information for pretty much any consumer to read. So as an example, I have a space that has occupancy for 163 hours. That's just aggregate data, right? It doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, I can kind of infer some meaning from it if I know a little bit more about the space and the work hours and where it is and things like that. But in itself, it doesn't say a whole lot. And the area media is used for 34 hours and the HDMI is used for 23 hours and the room is booked for 123 hours, right? That's just raw aggregate data, okay? Versus organizing and sorting a little bit. The space is occupied 108 hours during work hours, right? Just adding the one little bit of context helps tell the story a little bit more. The air media was used for 29 hours while booked and 5 hours when people just walked in and used the space. Versus the HDMI, which is used 4 hours while booked and 17 hours ad hoc, right? So this could tell me that it's people who book the rooms are more apt to use air media than people who don't. Maybe this is one of those kind of half private, half public type of spaces off a lobby where it facilitates both internal employees and guest users, right? So that can help us understand the story a little bit more. Now, if we run through some analytics, we can actually really get a true narrative. In this case, space was booked at 83% capacity before noon on work days, as opposed to 49% in similar spaces. So now we're starting to ask, why? Why is that? Why is this space so popular in the morning versus other similar spaces with similar technology, similar seating, et cetera? Why is this one more popular? When content is shared, 59% of the time users choose air media versus 41% of the time of HDMI. Okay, that's good to know. That helps us plan technology in the future. And people no-show 7% of the time as opposed to 12% in the company average for this space, right? So this space is not only more popular, but when people book it, they tend to show up. Okay, so that just gives us an opportunity to ask some questions. But what if I visualize it, right? So that's good information that we have sorted out in a narrative, but it took me time to read it, right? It's a lot of words. So that's where visualizing the data comes in. If a picture's worth 1,000 words, then 9 pictures are worth 9,000 words. I can see things at a glance. I don't even have to know what's on those charts. I know that there are some outliers. I know that some things are higher than lower, and I can kind of key in onto those things. I know in that first graph that something happened a lot more times than the other thing, right? Then I can drill in. So it conveys a lot of information very quickly. And that's the beauty of infographics. They convey information at a higher bandwidth as any picture does. So for instance, if we just take a look at this chart here, and I'm just gonna draw some attention to it. Here I have a blue line. I can see that my blue line is above my orange bars. What we're looking at here is the blue line is occupied hours versus booked hours on the orange bar graph. Okay, so I can instantly tell if I look at conference room 2112, and I apologize, the text is really small for you. Conference room 2112 and 2113, something about those lends themselves to the users using them or occupying them without booking them. Okay, versus if I go over to meeting rooms 9155 and 9158, for whatever reason, these rooms, although overall used less, when people, they are booked more frequently than people show up, right? So it just gives us an opportunity to ask why. And for facilities managers, this sort of thing is gold, right? It helps them understand how their facility operates and to plan for future facilities or remodels. We're all familiar with infographics. I mean, you all know the terms of flattening the curve and 7-week averages or 7-day averages now. These are just common parlance and context. We can instantly visualize what those things mean instead of poring over raw data. Okay. So at this time, Rich, can we run a quick poll and then we'll take some Q&A while that poll is running? I'd like to ask the question, what is a single pane of glass? A single application that can provide an overall dashboard for operations, a type of touch panel, a window with poor acoustic properties, modern art. We'll see who the wise guys are here. Are there any questions that we would like to take while this is running, Rich? You're muted.
Yes, I am. Okay, does Crestron have any recommendation, documentation, i.e. these are items, information that is often desired by institutions to gather? And the answer is yes. We actually have a Fusion specifications guide that we're going to talk about in depth, but I think it's a really good thing to understand is, and Tim, you talked on it, Matt, you've spoken to it. The idea is to gather an intelligent set of data that makes sense for each client, and each client is going to differ, but there are guidelines, and I will send out in the answer the specifications workbook that we use for those types of contexts. Having said all that fun stuff, we'll let this poll run for a few more seconds. Tim, when you speak, can you get a little closer to the mic? People are having a little hard time hearing you. Okay.
Yes, will do.
Thank you. Okay. Great. Having said all that fun stuff, we're going to give the poll another 7 seconds and we'll wrap that one up. I think most people get it. And there are some people who did like the jokes we put in, Matt, as well. So, which is pretty good. All right. So let's go ahead and share the results.
Yay.
And most people know what it is, which is great.
Yeah, good job, guys. I saw another Q&A question come in here. And the question is where does Crestron get information on what metrics matter to customers? I mean, we get told all the time, but what's really important here is the data that goes into the system that can be pulled out. So we have a really good idea of what the common system is, right? Occupancy, we know occupancy, just adding that one little bit of data makes everything else make more sense. It's a hugely important piece of context. You add scheduling on top of that, now we really are starting to understand how these rooms are being used. If we know what devices are being selected, what devices are being used, what inputs are being used, right? The feedback that we already have with Crestron components. If we're just writing it down now, just having it written down can let the organization slice and dice it however makes sense to them. Right? They can compare device usage versus occupancy, right? Just by having those 2 bits of data, I can compare room booking versus occupancy, right? So it's really just crucially important to get the data in there in the first place. And we're not really going to dictate how it's parsed, sliced, and diced and analyzed. That's really up to the organization. We'll give you some starting points and some pointers to get you started, and that will let them evolve their own conversation into how to best use that data. Okay, so the recommendation is we know that if there's a thing that you can get feedback on and write down, do it. All right, because if the information isn't there, if the data isn't there in the first place, it cannot be turned into information. Okay, good question. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between Fusion and Xio Cloud. This class is mostly about Fusion, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, the big reason why is that it does this really, really well. It does the data thing really well. It's been doing it for a long time really well. So for the state of the art today, if you're going to go out and design a system today that's all about metrics and data, Fusion is your go-to tool. Yes, Xio has it as well, but if I want to get every little nitty-gritty thing and have the ability to parse it out however I want, Fusion is your tool, okay? But it's custom. Right, it has to be programmed with some exceptions. We'll talk about those, right? If you're using AV Framework or similar devices, Direct Connect, they don't need to be programmed. But when we're talking about gathering data in your average conference room, it does need to be programmed. And if it's not programmed, it's not gathered. If it's not gathered, it can't be analyzed, okay? It does produce raw data and aggregate data, and Tim will show you that a little bit later. A processor is required for that programming to live on. The processor is the thing that reaches out and touches stuff. It does lend itself to external analytics, and we'll talk about some BI tools. Tim's going to walk you through some of that. It is available as a perpetual on-premise license or as a software as a service in the cloud. Okay, so it's available both ways. Whereas Xio Cloud is just basically standard. You're going to get an Xio Cloud compatible piece of hardware. It's going to talk to the cloud and it's going to report what it reports. You don't have to program a thing. You just have to claim it into the cloud. And at the firmware level, it's going to do what it does with Xio Cloud. It is based on an IoT architecture, and I'll illustrate that in a minute. Like I mentioned, no programming, and it has integrated analytics. So it's got dashboards built right into the tool. So it's not going to give you so much raw data. Our goal there is to give you a finished product. And it is available as a software as a service only, right? Xio Cloud by definition is cloud-based. Where they overlap is the monitoring metrics and information, okay? They can both tell you live status of things, okay? They can both provide some metrics and reporting, and they can both provide some information that's actionable and usable, okay? Whether real time or historical. Now, they both do a whole lot more than these things. Again, the context of this class is just the data, and I do encourage you to look into these tools more because they do a whole lot more than these things, especially Xio Cloud, right? We're going to be focusing a lot on Fusion. Xio Cloud, the parts of Xio Cloud that we're not going to be talking about are really cool, okay? So I do encourage you to take a closer look at those things. From a fundamental architecture perspective, this is really critical that you understand. Xio Cloud is an IoT model. That means Internet of Things. That is, the devices themselves are communicating with Xio Cloud directly. Okay, that means we need to have a certain level of hardware capability in order to do this, to be able to manage that connection in a secure way to the Azure cloud where Xio Cloud is hosted. Okay, compare that to Fusion, whether on-prem or in the cloud. The architecture is pretty similar. The control system, in most cases, is the proxy to Fusion. Okay, that is, the device will interact with the control system. The control system will gather all that stuff and funnel it up to Fusion, whether in the cloud or on-premise. Okay, it's really key that those fundamental architectures are kept in mind when we start thinking about, well, when will Fusion become Xio? When will Xio become Fusion? Okay, they work in fundamentally different ways. Okay, in terms of standing them up and getting them going, Xio Cloud is pretty basic, right? You need an account. That means I need a device license to claim something against an Xio Cloud. Once I have an account, I just need compatible device, whether that be a touch screen, a scheduling panel, a processor, NVX, what have you. And they're going to be claimed directly into the Xio Cloud portal. I don't have to program a thing because, again, everything that Xio Cloud does with that device is on the firmware level. They do require outbound internet access, WAN access. By the very nature of Xio Cloud, it's in the cloud, so the devices have to be able to see the cloud in order for it to work. It is subscription-based. Because it's in the cloud, we're hosting the services. Versus Crestron Fusion on-premise. Okay, this is the one of the two flavors that Fusion is available in. It is available as a perpetual license. That is, you buy the license, you have it forever. So the end user has that license forever, including support and upgrades. It does require a SQL database. That's where all of that data that Fusion is gobbling up gets written to, okay? And that's what can be queried later for analytics. It does require some hardware, and we do provide the specifications, the minimum requirements for that hardware. It does require some sort of system administrator. I mean, and fundamentally, with an on-prem server, someone's got to own it. Someone's got to be responsible for it. So that opens up a conversation. That can be the IT department, that can be the AV department, most frequently IT. So you have to have buy-in there as well. You're going to have to be able to see, devices need to be able to see the server, and the server needs to be able to see the devices, right? So if I've got a multi-site installation, I need to have the ability for my processor in site A be able to see the Fusion server in site B, okay? Whereas things in the cloud, that's not so much a concern because we're meeting in the cloud. As long as I can see the cloud and they can see the cloud, we meet in the cloud, okay? You do require a control system, referencing back to that architectural slide, because that's the path for all this data to get to Fusion in the first place, and it does require custom programming. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the importance of that in a bit. Compare that to Crestron Fusion Cloud. The big difference between on-premise and Fusion Cloud is on-premise is a perpetual license. Fusion in the Cloud is software as a service subscription based. But we take care of the hardware. We take care of the server. We take care of the software on the server. We take care of the SQL database. What you need to provide is outbound internet access to the processor or any other device that needs to communicate with Fusion in the cloud. And the way it's sold is a little bit different. So a little bit of difference in terms of visualizing the information between those two tools. Xio Cloud provides native dashboards for select products, and that list is growing. So scheduling panels provides room booking data and how they're used. A Crestron Mercury is going to give you a greater snapshot because it has greater awareness into the space, right? It's going to tell you when people make calls. Do they use Skype for Business? Do they use SIP-based calling? Do they plug in a USB and do BYOD? It'll give you that information. When people present, do they present via Air, Media, or HDMI? Because Mercury has visibility on all these different subsystems in that one package, it's going to kind of give you a room snapshot and has that capability. With Exo Cloud really is claiming the device, wait 24 hours for some data to accumulate, right? I can't have historical data unless some history happens, and then enjoy, all right? Excellent for spaces without processors, because again, I don't need a processor. Each device is communicating directly to Xio Cloud, okay? Versus Fusion with a business intelligence software, a BI platform, that it's highly customizable. I can get very granular with the type of data and the type of reporting I want to get out of it, but it is program dependent. Again, if I don't get that data into Fusion in the first place, I can't analyze it. And there are several BI platforms to choose from. So Rich, real quick, I'd like to ask the crowd what BI platforms they use. What business intelligence platforms do you use?
Great, we've launched that poll. Let's see
and
how folks are doing that.
I would like to mention while folks are answering that poll that Microsoft does offer a program. It's called Dashboard in a Day. They hold them regionally. They're free to attend, and just to kind of get your feet wet with what's required to do a Power BI analytics with the data. Any questions pop up that we want to take at this time, Rich?
Let's take a look. Lots of questions on Xio Cloud, how to use it, what's the difference between Xio and Fusion. You may want to reiterate that again,
Okay.
but let everyone know also that Fusion is not going end of life. Xio is not going end of life. They are on parallel paths. So I think it'd be good just to reiterate and reinforce where you use Fusion, where you use Xio, and how they play nicely together.
That's great. That actually tees right up into the next topic.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, this just happens to be the most frequent question I get asked.
This is great. So we're going to go ahead, and since you're going to cover that in the next topic, I'm going to wrap up polling in about 10 seconds.
All right.
Okay. And there are other questions which you're going to cover. Why can't Xio Cloud gather the same information as Fusion? We'll talk about that. And we'll explain all those fun things. Is Smartsheets a viable BI for Fusion? That's a good question. Okay, let me go ahead and wrap up the poll and share the results. So why don't we take a look at these results?
Great. Yep. Yeah, Excel spreadsheet. That is kind of the OG, the original BI software, right? You have a table, you got a spreadsheet, and if you turn it into a graph, that is what we're talking about here. Things like Power BI just do that on a much grander scale, and Tim will talk about those in more detail in a bit. So let's talk about, close this real quick, but when will they merge? This is the burning question that I get asked all the time. Every day that I talk about Xio is a day that I get this question. And really, the short answer is merge is the wrong word, okay? The long answer is they're separate products with fundamentally different architectures as I've showed you. And that means that they're on fundamentally different evolutionary paths. The ultimate objective long-term is to provide that single pane of glass tool. So as Xio Cloud continues to evolve, if you've been paying attention over time, you've probably noticed that Xio Cloud today is not the Xio Cloud it was last year, right? We brought in so many incredible tools. The big push for the coming year is metrics and analytics, okay? Someone asked the question, how do I get data into Xio Cloud like I did to Fusion? It's different, right? Xio Cloud collects data directly from the device in an IoT type fashion, but at the very end of this presentation, we'll take a little peek into the future in some ways that it starts to look even more Fusion-like, okay? So will they ever officially we're just gonna flip a switch and say, okay, today they're together? No, we won't. They're different purposes and they serve different needs. The state of the art today is you can get anything into Fusion, any bit of data, anything that the processor can reach out and touch and solicit feedback on. You know, whether that's a display, whether that's a CO2 sensor, whether that's just a digital input, a contact closure. That's data that I can get into Fusion to turn into analytics down the road. Okay, so they're just fundamentally different platforms. Which is right for a particular organization requires a conversation, right? What is most important to that organization? Okay, if metrics and data, as we're talking about today, is critical to them, and I would argue that the larger the organization, the more critical this information is, then Fusion is probably a good way to go for them. The other things that Xio brings to the table, deployment, monitoring, managing, configuration, things we're not talking about today, but I do encourage you, if you've missed previous demos or techinars, to go back and watch the techinars, ask your regional sales manager for a demo. We have all kinds of tools to show you how that tool works. But you really have to take a holistic approach, a holistic conversation to understand the needs of your customer to be able to pair them with the right tool or tools, okay? So at this point, I'm actually going to turn it over to Tim, who is going to give us a run through of the various ways to visualize this data, both in Xio Cloud and with Fusion and external tools. And while we're switching over here, I'd like to ask another quick question, if we could. I think this is important just to set us a baseline for ourselves of are software as a service offerings currently important part of your designs? Yes, no, sometimes, and what's software as a service?
And actually that got asked already a few times on the question and answers here. So
okay.
We need to remember to explain things because we use terms that people may be familiar with and may not be familiar with. And so that's what we're going to cover here as well, which is great. While that's going on, there's a couple of questions that keep coming up, such as, do I need Xio Cloud and do I need, can I have Xio Cloud and can I have Fusion in the same business entity running at the same time? And if so, what's the benefit?
Absolutely, and a lot of those benefits are going to be the part of Xio Cloud that we're not talking about today. Okay, Fusion is going to provide a very rich set of metrics and the capabilities for metrics, whereas Xio Cloud, and we'll just lay it out right here. Fusion stops when it comes to pushing data back to the real world, right? If I want to update firmware from Fusion, I can't do it. If I want to load a new program or touch panel file from Fusion, I can't do it. If I want to set configurations, set IP tables, set Ethernet settings on the device and directly manipulate and configure that device from Fusion, I can't do it. That's where Xio Cloud comes in. It's that two-way street. Okay, so yes, absolutely. We've got several customers that have both tools, leveraging different parts about it. As we evolve into the future, you're going to see Xio Cloud have more and more overlap with the metric side of Fusion, right? So have those conversations going forward. What does it look like today? What is the best tool for you, customer, today? Okay, maybe it's both.
Okay, and let's share the results. So some people, about 21% are including software as a service, 31% are not, 11% are not even familiar with the term. So that really brings us up to 42% on the no, and 38% sometimes, which is really makes sense. You figure that's pretty much more often than not. There's a huge opportunity with software as a service for recurring revenue. And that's an important thing to consider as a design architect and a technology architect is I want to be able to create a system not only that's a single point of sale, but that allows me to remain in constant communication with my customer for updates, to provide a great support and a great experience with the technology, to help guide them as they go through a refresh cycle. Some companies refresh facilities every 3 years, some 5, some 7, some 10. Okay, it all depends on the world that they live in. And this really does help the customer better understand what they're getting and why they bought it, and how to position it is a really important component in what you guys need to do from a design perspective.
It's really interesting that that data correlated pretty tightly with the first question that we asked is, do you design for data? About the same amount of people said no, as said, no, not really thinking about software as a service. So that makes sense. Definitely an opportunity. So Tim, take it away. How do we visualize data in Xio Cloud Fusion and along with external tools?
All right, let's dive directly into first the Exo Cloud environment. Now, as Matt mentioned, Exo Cloud is actually quite a powerful platform, quite a powerful service. But for this presentation, we're just going to focus on the data that we're getting, the real-time data that we can see right away, and also the historical data that we're getting from our devices. So we're just going to cover a very, very small set of the functionality of Exo Cloud. To start, what we see here on the left-hand side of our interface, we can see our groups, and these groups basically house all of our Crestron devices. These groups can be set up and configured however desired. And whenever you click on a group, you're going to get right away in the middle of the screen your status overview. And this is the basic information that all of the Crestron devices are reporting to Exo Cloud natively. To get this view, the only thing you need is, of course, your Exo Cloud account. You need to claim a device, wait for it to come online, and this is what you get. There is no configuration needed within Xio Cloud, and there is no configuration needed on the device itself. This all is natively available. If you have a look here at our status overview, we see all of our devices, the name, device model, firmware version, serial MAC address, online status, whether settings are still pending for delivery, meaning someone changed the setting within Exo Cloud for a specific device, and that setting still needs to be pushed down to the device, that you can see here as well. And you'll see that the online offline status is very clearly marked in a green red type of color. So very with just one glance, basically you already get this this information here. If you go down the groups, you'll get the information of the devices in those specific subgroups. And if you click on a single device, the status view is going to change, and it's going to show us the information on how the device, the Crestron device, is currently set up. So here, this is a Mercury. We'll see that the system currently is online, and all of the settings that we can do in the web interface of the Mercury, we have available here as well. And we can see how the device is currently being configured, or how it's currently set, basically. Moving back to our group or any of the subgroups or main group, we also have here an additional alerts view. And this alerts view shows us any of the active or resolved alerts for any of the devices. Now, you might wonder, what is an alert? What is considered to be an alert? Well, within Exo Cloud, everything is configurable. So that means natively there is no alerts configured. However, you can choose completely what type of status feedback you consider to be an alert. So how does that work? Well, let's take a quick look here in the settings of Exo Cloud, and let's go to our main alerts window. It is right here that we can, per device type, actually view and set and configure all of our alerts. If we make a new alert, what's very interesting, again, it's per device model. And the reason is every single device is gonna report a different set of data to Exo Cloud natively. Some devices are very similar. Devices running the AV framework, for example, report a whole set of similar data, but also some unique data specific to the device itself. But those data points that are being reported are here available in the status fields. And for an AM300, for example, we have device connection status, we have occupancy status, sleep status, display power status, even fusion status, Wi-Fi dongle status. So a whole lot of information that's natively being reported to Exo Cloud. And again, no configuration needed. This is all out of the box. So if I want to create a specific alert, let's say on occupancy status, I can specify that my occupancy status being reported by the AIM300 needs to be occupied. And it needs to be occupied for at least 5 minutes. And if that's the case, I'm gonna generate an alert, a notification. An alert can have several different severity levels. So a notice, a warning, an error, and critical. And again, freely configurable based on the exact requirements. Let's say, let's consider this to be just a notice, a notification. I can add this here. And actually it's already added. You do get a message saying that people get alert. So I'm gonna make another one. Potentially this one is also created, we'll see. Device connection status. I can have the online or offline status. And if a device goes offline, the AIM300, for 5 minutes at least, then maybe we consider this to be a critical alert. We add it, and this one, in fact, is also already created. So what does that mean? From the moment the alert is created here, it's going to show up in the main group settings under the alerts section. Now, this means you can view the alerts when you're actually logged onto Exo Cloud, but we also have the option. This was actually one of the questions I saw passing by a few times in the Q&A. Does Exo Cloud send out emails? Can it send out alert emails? Well, yes, it can. It can send out alert emails, but it can also send out SMS text messages. The way to set this up is we're going to go to our users, and it's actually per user that we can define the type of alerts that this person should be receiving, again, based on what their role is within the organization. Really important is that that person has at least an alert email address or an alert mobile phone number so that Exo Cloud can send out text messages or emails. In the moment that's in place, we can go to the access and alerts section here, where we have, again, a representation of our group nodes. So all of the groups that we had containing our devices are listed here as well. And next to them, we have a minimum alert level. And that means that I can, per group, per device group, specify what the minimum alert level needs to be for that person to receive an email notification. So maybe I'm not really interested in the notices, in whether or not a room goes occupied or unoccupied, but I do care when a device goes offline, because then I need to take action and, of course, check out the system, see what's going on. Then I'm going to set my minimum alert level to warning or error. Let's say warning. And now I'm going to be receiving warnings, errors, or critical statuses of devices within the ESG group right here. And again, per group, you can set your minimum alert level. You can set it to none if you don't want to receive any emails or alerts, or to inherit if you just want to inherit it from the top level as well. So this is fully configurable per user, per group, and you can set these severity levels as well. So already quite a lot of functionality here just for getting like a real-time view of our devices. And again, there we go. Just to mention here, our groups here contain devices. So this is really Crestron device centric here, showing all of our Crestron devices. This is our real-time data. We also have historical data available, and we're going to start off here with the activity log. So the activity log is going to show us, again, an historic overview of all of the events that occur, so all of the alerts that we have configured within Xio Cloud. But here, this activity log is also going to show us whether any changes were made from Exo Cloud itself. So if I'm pushing different settings to a device or to a group of devices, I'm also going to get an entry in the log here showing date and time of when this happened, who exactly made the change, to what device model and which device or global group the setting was deployed to. And I'm also going to get an overview of the original value, the previous value of the property that was changed, and also the new value. So if something doesn't work after a configuration change, I can always see what the change was and revert back if needed. And this activity log is downloadable. Exo Cloud keeps track of this for 30 days. But you can download it, of course, to store it locally on some storage as well if you want to. Next up, for historical data, we have the dashboard available in Exo Cloud. The dashboard, again, is going to show us some historical usage of our Crestron devices. And the way this works is from the moment you claim a device, it's going to come online, the device is going to gather some metrics about its usage, and especially our AV framework devices gather a lot of metrics like the Mercury, the M300. They actually, because they are small conferencing systems, small presentation systems, they gather natively a lot of data about their usage. And that means we have quite a few options here. We can select our device model, or if we select a specific device like the Mercury here, we go to dashboard again. We can see here already some data. We have a few dashboards available for the Mercury. One is device usage. And let me make this full screen for you guys to see. There we go. This view that we're getting here already tells us quite a few things. So right off the bat, we can see here that the Mercury is actually being used quite a lot as a bring your own device type of system here. The USB connection is used quite often, and Skype for business calls and SIP calls aren't really used that often. Now this is all sort of provided by Power BI. We're using Power BI technology in the backend to provide this dashboard. And that means that we can actually click on data here, and the views are going to change interactively. So they're really going to highlight in the other graphs as well what I have selected, what I'm interested in. Because this is historical data, we can choose our date range as well here, and of course also our work hours to really get the data that we're interested in. And again, really important to note, this is all out of the box. There is no configuration needed within the Crestron devices themselves. There is no configuration needed within Exo Cloud. You claim your device, comes online, and after 24 hours, the device is going to start sending its gathered data, so it can be turned into metrics and analytics right here in the dashboard. Now, I saw another question popping up in the Q&A quite frequently, and that is, can this data be exported, and can we implement it in our own Power BI environment or in some kind of other analytics application? And the answer is yes, you can. This data here very easily via this dashboard can be exported. You'll have the option here, more options, and this is going to bring up an export data option right here. And this is going to export the data in an XLS or in a CSV type of file, and that can then be imported in another application or in Power BI to combine the data with other metrics. So that's all possible. All right. So Exo Cloud, it's all native out of the box, included in our device's firmware. The views here is what you get, and these are being populated automatically, and there's no configuration needed. Now, moving on to our other platform, Fusion, things are a little bit different. We're going to find that the information shown here, in some cases, is very similar to what's being shown in Exo Cloud. But here we also have the option to show a whole lot of other information and a whole lot of other data. Now, I want to start here by saying the view that we're getting here already is not native. So that means this view, to get such a view within Fusion, you need to have programming and you need to have a configuration within Fusion. Whereas with Exo Cloud, it comes natively. Here, there's configuration needed in programming, in your design, and in Fusion itself as well. Another big difference which I want to highlight here is, again, we have our tree view here on the left-hand side showing all of our regions or groups, let's call them, nodes. But here we are talking about rooms. So Fusion is really room-centric, whereas Exo Cloud is much more Crestron device-centric, right? So that means I'm seeing here room information, high-level room information. On a functional level, room information, is my system turned on or off? Some contextual information maybe as well. What's the humidity? Is there occupancy? What's the temperature in the room? So it's really room focused. So starting here, we can click on our nodes or on a single room, and in the middle screen, in the Rooms tab, we're going to get some information. This information here we call attributes, and attributes are, again, data points coming from the room, and this needs to be defined up front. What type of data points are important and what type of data points need to be gathered from your environment, from your devices, and how do they need to be sent to Fusion? Because Fusion is going to be, as Matt already mentioned a few times, your data aggregator, gathering all of this information in, but the information needs to be supplied to Fusion in a very consistent manner. And if that's not the case, you're going to end up with views which are a little bit inconsistent, showing some blanks here and there. And we're also going to end up with some reporting information, which is going to be spread out over several different reports rather than in a single report showing all of the data. So there are a few considerations to make here. So you see here our attributes, our room information. We can create our own views here by creating what we call attribute nodes. And these here, for example, processor information, give us different pieces of information being sent from the room. In this case, it's going to be processor information, processor MAC model, processor uptime that can be reported back to Fusion for reference if needed. And again, this is all programmed. This is not natively. This needs to be included in the program. A lot of people are probably now wondering, how do I program this? Is there some documentation about it? And of course, yes, there is. And we're going to talk about that as well in just a few moments. Besides the nodes and the different views that we can create, we can also create what we call filters. And a filter is basically a set of conditions on a set of attributes. And when the attributes meet that set of conditions, it's going to bring forth the rooms that meet that criteria. So for example, I have here room occupied. I see here also rooms which are not occupied apparently. So what I can do to make things easy is I can just create a filter. I can select my room occupied attribute. I can specify that the operator needs to be on. Close. I'm going to call this the occupied filter. Save and close this. There we go. And now I can just select my occupied filter. And now it's only going to show me the rooms which are occupied, again, based on what I selected here on the left-hand side of the screen. Again, fully configurable. It needs to be configured. And of course programmed as well. If I go to a specific room, I have another tab here called the Assets tab. And the Assets tab
hey,
is
Tim, sorry to interrupt. You keep moving in and out of the field of the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, let me move in again. Sorry, my headset is broken, so I am forced to use my laptop microphone, which is not the best. I'm sorry for that. Let me move in just a little bit more. Just let me know if it's not okay.
Yeah, if you stay close, it's fine. Just, we all have a tendency to move in and out. So just if you could stay close, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Perfect. All right. So whilst the room section right here is primarily designed for a high-level room status monitoring dashboard, here we're really going to focus on our devices inside room. And this could be a Crestron scheduling panel. This could be in addition to the panel, a display. Could be a UC engine as well. And those devices are going to be listed here. Some devices connect natively to Fusion, others need to be programmed. Whether they're programmed or connected natively, they're going to show up here in this section. Once they show up here, we have another set of information available to us. And in this example, this is a UC engine. Here we have information about the IP address, about the date of purchase that can be set, model, warranty expiration date. So all these things can be set in Fusion. And also we have here another status view. And again, these are attributes, and these are attributes which are unique to this specific device. That's why we prefer to have them here in the assets overview and not in the global rooms overview, because these pieces of data are just unique to this device. And maybe this device is not present in the other rooms. So I don't want this to be in my global rooms overview because it's going to create a grid full of holes, let's say. So I want to keep this central right here. If my device is programmed in my control system, I can again determine myself what the information is that's going to get reported to Fusion, what is important for Fusion to visualize as real-time data, and also what information is important for Fusion to store, to use afterwards for historical data purposes. And in addition to the rooms and assets, for our real-time data, we also have the My Room View tab, which shows critical statuses. And critical statuses are triggers, alerts. You can compare them with alerts in Exo Cloud. And they are also configured within the programming, within the control system. Whenever the control system detects that the device goes into a certain state, whether that's a faulty state or an offline state or a faulty resolution is detected or whatever the case may be. In the program, we can configure this to be an alert. And again, we have the same severity levels here. We have notifications, warnings, errors, or fatal messages. And again, based on the requirements, based on the customer needs, these can be defined and these can then be implemented in the program. Now you guys might be thinking, okay, so the programmer needs to program this, but how does he know what exactly it needs to be? We'll discuss this in just a few moments because we do have documentation which takes you through talking to the end client and setting up a scope of work for the programmer, so all of this is correctly included. We'll get to that point in just a few moments. We also have help requests and offline and partially online rooms displayed here as well, just for a quick glance to see what's going on in your rooms. All of these attributes have the option to send out email notifications as well. So we can set up alerts, email alerts on these attributes, and whenever a specific device reports a specific status on an attribute, we can have Fusion send out an email to a set of recipients, technical persons, maintenance persons, to make them aware of a specific status or issue or something that needs their attention. In addition to this, we also have something called attribute forwarding, where we can specify a set of forwarding rules that if an attribute goes into a specific state, Fusion will send out the list of information with the room details, the asset details, the attribute details to an external web server where it can be picked up by another program, also for help desk purposes or maintenance purposes. So those are all items that are available within Fusion. But again, this all needs to be programmed. So none of this is out of the box. It needs to be programmed within your control system. So that means it needs to be well defined up front and also needs to be configured within Fusion. Now, moving from the real-time data to the historical reporting data, we have a reports and analytics section within the Fusion web interface. And here we have an example. So what I'm going to do is here, briefly going to show you guys what this looks like. Again, on the left-hand side, we have our tree view showing all of our regions and our rooms. And in the middle screen, we have report selection, date range filter, and also an option to schedule a report to make a report recurrent and to frequently send out a scheduled report to a certain set of recipients if needed. Just to give you an example, I'm interested, let's say here in the EMEA region. Yeah, that's fine. And I'm gonna click on USA here as well. And here I have report types. These are all reports that are natively available in Fusion. So what does that mean? Well, our programs are gathering data, sending it over to Fusion, and Fusion is storing some of the data for historical reporting purposes. So that means there's a dedicated section within the Fusion database that contains a history, if you will, of all the signal changes and all the attribute changes. Most of the Fusion default native attributes are enabled for logging already. If you have any custom attributes that you also would like to include in your reports, they need to be manually enabled for logging in the setup of the Fusion pages. Just as an example here, I'm going to show you the room utilization report. And as you can see, there are quite a few reports natively available here. I'm just going to go for room utilization. Gives me the option to specify some more properties like days, weekdays, weekends, all days, or just single days. My business hours, the meeting types as well, because we're talking about utilization, and also a date range filter. So I'm going to do, let's say, week to date. There we go, of these regions here, and I'm going to run the report. And now Fusion is actually taking a look at the reporting section of the database, gathering information and displaying it for me. Now, the reason why I'm showing this report is because, yeah, we have a few visualizations right here. We have a few lines. So Friday, Thursday with some lines and a percentage in utilization. Then here we have some numbers that show something. And then we have some other pages of the report as well. And basically they're a printout of the information. So it's still actually data that we're sort of printing out, but it doesn't really tell us a story. It doesn't really give us a whole lot of information to go by here. Now, in some applications, in some projects, this might be enough. There are several very good native reports within Fusion, which are very usable. But we're seeing nowadays that people are expecting more analytics and more metrics. Yeah, more, let's say, calculations need to be done in order to really tell a story, as Matt has mentioned. And because of this, our reporting tool here is great for what it does. But if you do need more analytics and you do need to have some more information, some more context, we are briefly going to show the Fusion dashboard. This is very, very interesting. So we briefly touched on Power BI within Exo Cloud. We're using Power BI technology to really visualize historical data about usage of our devices. We've done the same now for Fusion. So we have the Fusion dashboard, which is basically a Power BI type of file, type of platform. And this dashboard here also connects to the Fusion database in the same way that the reporting tool does to gather the historical data that's inside the Fusion database. And this dashboard then shows us the information, but what it does in addition is a whole lot of analytics. And that means that a lot of information that's in the Fusion database is going to get compared with each other. We're actually making some calculations in there. We're making some comparisons to really tell a story and to really give the relevant information instead of just printing out the reported data. And this results in some views here that are very, very user-friendly, that really give us a whole lot of information by just glancing at the screen right here. So what I want to do is, because I think we're getting close on time, I'm briefly going to go through these examples just very, very briefly. And then I'm going to show you the information on how to actually get started with this, because this is really, really powerful. The first few pages of this dashboard are actually also current data. So Power BI has the option to set up sort of a continuous connection to your Fusion database to regularly refresh the data that it's getting. And the first few tabs here are current data. And you can see so here by looking at the last refresh UTC time here. This one, it's been a while actually, but here you can see how up to date your data is. And what we're seeing here in this current status view is our scheduled rooms, occupied rooms, and in-use rooms. Scheduled rooms means based on the calendar information of the rooms, which rooms are scheduled right now, or again, based on your last refresh date that's mentioned. Occupied rooms, which rooms have currently people inside them. And in-use rooms basically uses the system power attributes to identify whether the system in the room is actually in use. And this really gives us already a view of which rooms are scheduled, occupied, and in use. And we can already see right away that currently there are more rooms occupied than there are scheduled. So people are actually using up the rooms without scheduling them, but just looking at this view. Moving on to another view, currently scheduled spaces and currently available spaces. Again, we have a room division per room type, which can be defined. And here we see that for the classroom, for example, if I click on this, again, it's fully interactive. We see that 29% of the rooms are currently scheduled. However, if we look here, we do see that only 25% is available. So that means that there are more people inside the rooms or inside some rooms that are not scheduled actually. And I get this information by just looking at the screen here. And I can also make a sort of a selection per room as well if I wanted to. Again, all interactive, all yeah, fully automatic as well. Occupied spaces, again, based on my room type here, I can see right away which room types are occupied at this time, at least the most, which are not. So that's very clear as well. Here, another very clear view, which shows me some information here. I can see, for example, for this room, that the room is occupied, there are people in the room, but they're not really, they haven't booked a meeting and they haven't used the system. Here, in this case, for example, we have people inside the room using the system, but they didn't schedule the room. And again, here I can just click on the data and you'll see the data being highlighted that I selected. And again, this connects to our database, gets the information from Fusion. And this works natively. The only thing, of course, to keep in mind is that the data needs to be present in the database. So that means it needs to be specified, needs to be designed for, and needs to be implemented in the program as well. And Fusion needs to be set up correctly for logging the information. Here we come to the more historical views that we have here. So the top scheduled room usage, so the most popular rooms and the least popular rooms. You'll see that for the historical views, we do have a date range filter here as well, and a business hours selection, which allows us to change the information that we're seeing here. And in Fusion, you would need to go back, create a new report, select the date range again, and all of your details, run a report, wait for the report to generate here. It just brings up the new data as you select it. Meetings hours and counts, top 10 organizers, an historical meeting duration, again, based on the date, the business hours, they're per room type as well. I can make a selection here and see the data per room type, or I can go to a very specific room and just have a study on that room and see how that room is actually being used. Another very interesting one, no-show. Here we have an overview of our top organizers, but also the top organizers that are never showing up for their meetings, where the room is actually not being used, even though it is scheduled with the occupancy sensor and with the decline from no-show rules you have available in Fusion. You make decline from no-show, and when no one shows up after X amount of time, when the meeting is started, the meeting gets canceled, and of course Fusion keeps track of this, and via this visual, we get a nice representation of that. Meetings over time, again, an historical view about our meeting duration, session duration, and occupied hours. So again, session duration based on system power, so whether or not our system inside room is being used. So again, it needs to be programmed, needs to be tracked, and then you can make comparisons right here. Device usage here as well. Device usage over time, again, an historical view right here. Wired versus wireless presentations, again, gives us some information on how the technology is being used. Offline incidents, whenever rooms goes offline, we track that as well, and we can do the incidents right here. Meetings and occupancy, actually Matt already touched on this specific report earlier. Notification history as well, very similar to our Fusion equipment status. So we have our notifications, well, our warnings, our errors, and our fails. We have a count per severity or per message. So which type of error is happening the most frequent for what type of room and when is this? So knowing this really allows you to dig into your rooms, fully understand how they're being used, what the most common problems are, when they are occurring, and this really gives you the power to make changes, or gives the client the power at least to make changes, make some adjustments to really iron out any type of hiccups there might be with the system. So this is really, really useful information. Help requests we have here as well. Now, the big power here is that this is also fully customizable. So that means you have the native views that you get when you use the dashboard. And I'll show you guys in a few minutes where to get this dashboard. But you also have the option within Power BI to make your own views, to make your own analytics. In some cases, I've been involved in projects where the everything was included within the Fusion system except for occupancy, because occupancy was handled by a separate BMS system, which was not linked to the Crestron system. So we did not have any way to get the occupancy data in, and Fusion didn't know about it. But within Power BI, we have the option to also import data from another source, from an Excel file, from a CSV file, from another database, SQL database. And then by making some tweaks within the dashboard here, you can actually combine the data and still use the occupancy, which is coming from another source, to power the visuals here and to still get your analytics correct as well. So this is a really powerful tool. And you guys might wonder now how to obtain it. Well, if we go to the Crestron.com website, to Crestron.com/Fusion, if you scroll down, you'll have here an option to download the Fusion dashboard. When you download the dashboard, you'll get a few files. And the very cool thing here is that we have a very, very good reference guide for the dashboard. And this reference guide really covers everything regarding the Fusion database. It covers exactly the tables that are in the database, how the data is stored, the types of data, so on a SQL level, really what the data looks like. In addition, we'll have an overview of all the native reports or native views within Power BI, because another question that comes up quite often is, I get these reports and these views within the dashboard, but what do they mean? Sometimes I find it very difficult to interpret the data that I'm seeing. Well, every single view is actually explained here in very much detail in this guide, and also shows what data is it using and how to interpret it. So it really gives you all of the information that you need. And of course, getting started with Power BI shows you step-by-step, screenshot per screenshot, how to set up a Power BI environment, how to open up the templates, how to connect to your Fusion database, and how to get the information in, and then also how to make minor tweaks to this, and how to set up your own type of views, of visualizations, of analytics. And typically it's going to be the data engineer at the client that's going to really focus on this, but the information is here. And of course, Microsoft also offers Power BI training, so the dashboard in a day, and also the Microsoft guided learning. We have some links to that as well, which we can provide. So. All right, and I've talked for quite some time now, I think. So I think, Matt, it's again up to you, probably. If there are any questions at this point that we need to discuss that frequently popped up, because I haven't kept an eye on the question and answer.
Yes, so I'm going to cover a few things. Power BI is not a Crestron product. The Fusion data is available to be manipulated using Power BI. You will need to purchase Power BI separately. The Fusion dashboard is included and is at no additional charge as part of the Fusion solution. Fusion can work with O365, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Okay, so that's both available to everyone. Is there a Power BI template that we can include in a link when we send this out, Tim? Examples.
Oh yeah, so actually the dashboard is the example. So once you open up the dashboard in Power BI, it's going to work. It's going to load all of the information, but you also have the option to go into the details of the visualizations and actually see step-by-step the queries that are being done to obtain information. And you can add steps in to import data from other sources, or you can make minor tweaks yourself. So the dashboard is actually the template to use, basically. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so Matt, why don't we turn it over to you, as we have hit the half hour of the class. We are running a little long, but let's keep going. We will stick around and continue as far as we can and ask your questions as well. Keep going, Matt.
Perfect. Thanks, Rich. Why don't we take a moment to ask a quick poll real quick. And how comfortable are you having conversations about the added value of information scopes with your stakeholders? You know, maybe that has changed throughout the course of this presentation. Hopefully that's influenced you to be a little bit more comfortable with having those conversations. Are you not at all comfortable? Are you somewhat comfortable? Are you very comfortable? Hopefully we're getting to the point where you're at least somewhat comfortable. Some questions that I wanted to answer. What does it mean to inherit an alert? That really has to do with, in Exo Cloud, the hierarchy that you build for your groups. Your parent group, if you assign a setting to your parent group, it's going to inherit down to the child group. So that's going to apply to settings for devices. It's going to apply to, automatically, it's going to apply to alert level settings as well. So if at the top level I say I want this person to receive critical error alerts, that's going to inherit on down by default. Now you can go in and manipulate it down the tree, but the default is inheritance. How are we doing on that poll, Rich?
Pretty good, Matt. Let's end the poll and let's share our results.
Good. That's promising.
Yep, 54% are somewhat comfortable with it. 39% are very comfortable with it, and hopefully we can help those 6% get more comfortable with it, Matt.
Absolutely.
Great.
All right, so we're kind of turning the corner here. So the question now is, how do we get there, right? How do we get to the point of expanding our scope into an information scope? And just as a reminder, where we are with in the process, right? We got to start at the end. We got to know where we're going to understand how that informs our design and what equipment to specify. So what that looks like in conventional terms, this means you had a functional scope. I had to define what the room needs to do, what the space needs to do, what the system needs to do, right? And that would inform my bill of materials, my drawings, and my functional programming scope. When we start talking about information, all of those things still apply, but we have a different goal we need to get to as well, right? Not only does the system have to function, we have to know what information we want to get out of the system. So it's going to inform our scope a little bit differently. So now we need to understand what equipment we need to specify that's going to give us that data in the first place, and that's going to change our total programming scope to include those functions as well. So a little bit about how to get there, some strategies, and really it comes down to knowing your customers and getting in front of the right people, frankly. You're probably most familiar with the AV and IT staff. You probably don't deal too often with the facilities folks, but where possible, I would encourage you and your sales team, and if you guys work together, really that helps tell the whole story. The facilities folks, they get this stuff, they really, really get the stuff, especially the part about the space utilization metrics. That is critical to them. And as we've established, you've got more touch points in those rooms than anyone else already. Offer a standard baseline. If we don't know exactly what they need, let's put in some useful data up front. And we're actually going to go more specifically on what that means and SSI models, et cetera. Utilize Crestron supported demos. We're here to help you. My role in my territory is to support my internal sales team and also our customers, our dealers, integrators, end users, to help them understand these solutions so they can properly specify them. There is a me pretty much everywhere on the planet. Take advantage of us. We can ride shotgun. We can help co-host these demos to help tell the story of the value that you can help bring to these solutions. And of course, the cloud first orientation. This is just something we hear, and I know you guys hear it as well. Organizations are becoming less and less interested in maintaining on-premise hardware servers and the staff required to run them. Now, that's not a universal truth. Obviously, we know that there are some organizations, government especially, where cloud just doesn't work for them. And that's okay. We have an on-premise solution. Fusion on-premise has been around forever. It continues to work, so continue to pursue those solutions. But for most users, they are definitely migrating towards a cloud-first orientation. And finally, just a thought here, most customers are overwhelmed with everything a system can do. Let's focus on what it should do, and what it should do is gather data whenever possible, right? Liken it to a touchscreen with every button possible to do every possible thing in the room. We've all seen UIs get simpler and simpler and simpler, and the smarts are built into the back-end automation, where I can just say, join, start, do my thing, and then the smarts are built into the space. Same thing here, right? We want to just build some basic data in there, which can then be analyzed in a lot of complicated ways after the fact. And another note that I want to point out is the Power BI, right? That's probably a foreign concept to a lot of us, but it's probably not a foreign concept to your customers, especially the larger organizations. I mentioned the utility company earlier. They use Power BI every day to visualize what's happening in the grid, where energy is coming from, who they're buying from, who they're selling to, right? It's all done via Power BI. So the likelihood is there's someone at that organization already familiar with those tools, whether it's the finance department or the production folks or supply chain people. They're probably using some form of business intelligence, whether it's Tableau or BI or Power BI or something else, okay? So find those people. It's going to help lead to more conversations. What about how to start these conversations? The interview. You start with some really simple questions. How do your users use the system? And they may have some stories, but how do you know? How do you know that's how they're using it? How do you know for sure? Are you sitting there observing them? Or are they just telling you? Is it all anecdotal? And for the most part, a lot of the stuff is anecdotal. What are your pain points? How do you know? Maybe there's a ton of pain points you don't even know about, right? Are common spaces in demand? Again, how do you know, right? I'm sure that there's enough anecdotal information at any organization to make some sort of case, but actual information is a lot more useful. How do you get notified and respond to system trouble, right? Do you even get notified of all the system trouble? What don't you know? And that's the bigger question to ask. How do you justify technology and real estate spend? Are you just buddies with the CTO and they trust you implicitly, or do you actually have to make a case and show some data and show some information? Okay, so these are ways to kind of start that conversation, and it can lead to some interesting places. But what if a customer doesn't know what they want, right? They like the idea, similar to my utility story. The facilities person loved the idea of it, but they didn't really know how to articulate exactly what they wanted out of it. They liked the story I told, right? So it was all about just getting the data in the first place. So offer a standard baseline, build the foundation. Kind of think about it as the 90th percentile use case. And in this sense, it really comes down to, if there's an occupancy sensor, let's track it. If there's not an occupancy sensor, what can we do to get one in there? Because that's going to be really valuable and rich data for the facilities people especially. Scheduling, are we hooked into scheduling? If not, can we be? Video sources, are we using our switchers, hopefully? If we are, then we have a lot of data that comes out of that switcher. What sources are being used? What's being active right now? If it's some sort of third-party device, can I talk to it? Okay, so the standard baselines are there, and specify a standard SSI module framework, which leads us to, what's SSI? There's a lot of acronyms out there for what SSI stands for, but this is the official, I'm sticking with it, the single system interface. We provide these modules. It's nothing that the user has to cook up. If you go back to RoomView and Fusion years and years ago, it was really painful. We didn't have SSI modules. It was all handcrafted art with every Fusion deployment. We've offered a standard now, and we absolutely encourage you to take advantage of these SSI modules to provide formatting consistency in the data, right? It must be specified by the designer. If you know anything about programmers, and I'm sure we have plenty of them on this call right now, programmers see a programming scope and that's what they program, right? They don't generally program a whole lot more into the system than what's on the programming scope. And that's one of the beauties of commercial is that it's all very scope driven. Where the scope ends is where my work ends, right? So if it's not specified up front, if I don't say I need SSI modules to track occupancy, I need SSI modules to track device usage, if I don't say that in the written specification, then it's not gonna end up in the system. You're just not gonna have that data. So having Fusion doesn't mean that you have the data. You gotta have it in the programming to get the data to Fusion. So I'm gonna actually turn it back to Tim real quick when we talk about selecting equipment, right? So we've talked about the information at the end, and now we're gonna talk about how that informs selecting the equipment up front and what equipment really needs to be there to get that data in the first place.
All right, so we talked about the importance of having your design up front and having a good understanding of what the exact requirements are. Next thing is indeed device selection, and this is really important because if we want to get the analytics out of the system, we need to get the data in first, because without the data getting into it, there's no data coming out of the system. So really important. I have my Crestron control system. That's great. My devices that I'm controlling, how can I control them? Is this a one-way or a two-way communication? What's the exact information I can get out of the system? How exactly do I need to obtain this information? And with the information that I get, can I transfer this to Fusion? Do I need to make some changes to the data? How exactly can I report this in the correct way to Fusion? So extremely important here that we fully understand the device's capability regarding the interfacing and also regarding the data that we can get out of it. Some of the devices connect natively to Fusion, Crestron scheduling panels, and we'll talk about Crestron connected devices as well in just a few moments. And these scheduling panels, they natively send scheduling information already to Fusion that's implemented within the device itself. So we're safe with that. That's great, the way it is. A lot of our devices are running the AV framework, and the AV framework can be considered as a sort of an internal native program within the device. And the good thing is the AV framework also follows the SSI programming standard. So that means if I have an AVF device, that's great. I can now program any type of other custom device, also use the SSI programming standard, and I got consistent data from all of my rooms and devices going into Fusion. For people who are interested in what exactly the AV framework currently reports, we have a guide to the AV framework, which basically shows all of the attributes and data points reported back to Fusion. And this can actually be used as sort of a baseline. If you do have AVF devices in your design, you can use this set of attributes as a baseline to also implement in any type of custom programming rules that you might have. So that's all included within the AVF as well. So all of our devices are connecting to our control system. Again, main point here, control system gathers all of the information from the devices, formats it, and sends it over to Fusion. If you follow the SSI programming standard, it is ensured that the data does get consistently to Fusion for all of your rooms, which powers your real-time views correctly, and which also powers your historical reports and the Power BI dashboard as well. Occupancy sensing, another really important one. We have a new PoE sensor, which can connect directly to a scheduling panel. And the scheduling panel will then, in addition to the scheduling data, also send the occupancy information to Fusion in the correct fashion. Or these sensors can also be connected to a control system. And then via the SSI standard, we have an occupancy sensor asset symbol that we need to include in our program, which will then report that data over to Fusion. The Mercury, another AVF device, natively includes occupancy sensing as well. And via the AV framework, via the SSI standard that is being implemented, also reports occupancy natively to Fusion. And then we have Crestron connected devices as well. So these are displays and projectors. And these devices actually have a Crestron chip inside, which means that the device will talk natively to Fusion and also report a set of data to Fusion. Now, a lot of questions I got here is, do we have a list of attributes that these Crestron connected devices from other manufacturers actually report to Fusion? And the answer is yes, we do. However, at this moment, it's not yet published on the website or on online help, and we're working to get that up as we speak. So that will be provided shortly as well. Video switching, also very important if we're interested in what type of sources are being used, what type of inputs, even perhaps what type of resolution is being used the most often. We need to use hardware that supports reading out these types of information. And if you have a Crestron video switcher, some of them do report resolutions as well, some of them don't. So you need to be really aware of, again, the requirements. What do I need to get from the system, and does my hardware support this? Extremely important. And of course, any type of other device that can be controlled by a control system via Ethernet, IP, or serial connection, or CresNet, or even just an I/O port, as Mel already mentioned earlier. If we can get the information into the processor, we can get it over to Fusion for your visualizations or for your metrics as desired. BACnet as well, so another BMS system can be linked with our 3 series processor in case that system is handling some information, like, for example, occupancy in the one project I was involved with. That's all possible. So once we have defined our devices, once we know that our devices can actually deliver the information that we need, it still needs to be programmed, of course. Our control system needs to be set up in such a way that it actually gets the information from the device and then forwards it over to Fusion. And in that way, the programming really forms like the keystone, the center stone of a good Fusion deployment. And if it's not in the code, of course, Fusion can't do anything with it. It won't visualize it, and it won't include it in any of the reports. So programming is extremely, extremely important. And that's why we have the SSI standard specifically for programmers to use and to include. And as Matt mentioned, SSI stands for Single System Interface. And this standard basically describes exactly how a single Fusion room needs to be programmed in order for all the data to get correctly to Fusion, for all the data to use the correct pathways into Fusion, for Fusion to visualize the data correctly in real time, but also to store it in the database for later reporting and analytics, and so on and so on. Now, the cool thing is here also, it's a standard, it's fully documented on our website. We have a reference guide that step-by-step explains programmers how to implement this. We have an online help answer ID with tech tips regarding the SSI standard, and we also have videos which module per module show how to implement this this standard. And really important as well, in the specifiers workbook, the Fusion specifiers workbook that Matt mentioned earlier, from the moment you have specified a certain requirement for the system, in the specifiers workbook, there's also a programming scope of work included for that section. And that means from the moment the design is fully specified, you'll have a scope of work ready for the programmer. And the scope of work includes the steps to take within the SSI standard in order to get the desired functionality and data out of the system. So that's really powerful as well. There we go. So the standard, real brief. We have a main SSI module responsible for connecting to our Fusion room symbol within the program. And this main module will connect to all of the sub-modules, sub-SSI modules that that offer all of the functionality. We also have the asset programming model fully explained within the guide. And really important here also, especially in your designs, is if you do have custom rooms, please keep the limitation of 10 Fusion rooms per 3 series processor. Because if you go over 10 Fusion rooms per 3 series processor, because of all of the SSI modules that are needed, the system can be actually working quite hard. So we need to have a little bit of headroom to ensure we have a stable system. So per 3 series processor, 10 Fusion rooms. Doesn't matter if it's in a single program slot or divided across the 10 programs, but it's a maximum of 10 Fusion rooms. And that's also included in the SSI standard. And really important consistency for the programmers when they're implementing this. It's always a good idea to set up an attribute naming convention. This can be based again on the AV framework, for example, what's available in the guide, what's available in the AV framework already, or if it's fully custom based on the customer needs, set up a naming convention for your attributes so that they're all named the same, because meeting in progress does not equal meeting in progress. If there's some casing wrong in the attribute name, it's going to end up as a unique attribute in Fusion. And this means that your real-time views are going to have some holes here and there. And also for your reporting purposes, you are going to run into some problems because you're going to miss some data because it's listed under a different type of attribute. Of course, with Power BI, it's really powerful. And here you can actually correct these types of situations. But still in the real-time visual part of Fusion, you're still going to run into some issues regarding the actual views that you're getting. But reporting-wise, any type of these sort of, let's say, mistakes or inconsistencies can be handled within Power BI. Room attributes in our room tab, keep them as high level as possible. So that's a general online, offline, a general system in use, a general occupied, and maybe temperature in the room, and a global error status. And then the very granular device information, let's put that in the assets view, because most of the information is related to the actual devices themselves, which might not be available in other rooms. So, and of course, if you do have custom attributes and they need to show up in any of your historical reports and analytics, make sure to enable room view logging for those attributes in Fusion, because otherwise Fusion is going to visualize the data, but it's not going to store it in the logging section of the Fusion database. And that means there's no historical data to gather, there's no historical data to use in your report. So that's also really important.
Thanks, Tim. That was really great stuff. I promise you we are on the final stretch here. I know we're run long. This is the final set of things, just kind of to wrap it up, kind of bookend our presentation here. You know, we started at the beginning with the concept of expanding your scope beyond conventional AV. So let's talk about some possible use cases and what that looks like. And it really starts again with who's our audience and what information do they need? What could be useful to them? And these are just some inspiration thoughts, right? This is certainly not comprehensive or in any way fully capturing all the possibilities. Possible audience is AV manager. You know, they're usually the people who are going to be responding to situations, or their staff are going to be responding to situations, and they're generally accountable to the users, that's their customers internally. The IT manager, they're going to be interested in usage and performance analytics. And sure, AV manager and IT manager, they're oftentimes the same group these days. Understood. Totally get that. So they can be used interchangeably. Facilities manager, this is an audience that designers typically aren't getting in front of yet. If you are, awesome, keep doing it. If you aren't, if that may be an audience to try to get in front of, because again, they get this stuff. They're going to have the buy-in for this stuff. And oftentimes, increasingly, the AV and IT folks are rolling up to facilities in a lot of organizations. So it's a little easier to find those people. And kind of a new thing to think about these days, especially with what's going on in the world these days, the workplace technology, or HR, the people who are really responsible for the employee experience in any organization. And managing people flow is kind of a big deal these days, right? And as people consider how to get back to work, and how to manage these spaces, and how to distance and keep people apart, and how close together they can be, and things like that, that's going to be important. Hey, Rich, real quick, I'd like to throw up the very final poll here, if we could, because I want to understand from you guys who you would currently consider a stakeholder insofar as your designs. Is it the AV manager? Is it the IT manager? Is it the facilities manager, the workplace technology manager, human resources manager? None of the above. Pick as many as apply. Okay, this is, again, you probably had more polls in this session than most of the others. And hey, being a data class, this is useful data for us to understand who you folks are talking to, and how you folks are presenting this to the world. Any questions we want to take real quick, Rich, while we're waiting for these results?
I apologize. I crashed
Uh-oh.
a little while ago, so I lost almost all of the questions.
Oh, no.
Apparently, if you disconnect and you come back in, you lose the previous history. We'll have it in the data sheets, and we'll get everyone answered. But let's see here. A couple of things. They need clarification a little bit further on Crestron Connected and how that really plays in. Where do you use Crestron Connected, and why, and what is it really? And people really weren't clear on that. And Tim, unfortunately, they're still having a hard time hearing you. So Matt, can you help to answer Crestron Connected for our customers? I mean, there's some people saying, I love it, but not everyone knows what it is.
Yeah, so Crestron Connected is a quality of life enhancement for integrating this stuff into a Crestron ecosystem, both on a control basis, right? For a processor to control a Crestron connected projector, it's easy. It's standard. I drop a Crestron connected display into my program, and regardless of the manufacturer of that display, usually projectors, I can control it with my standard set of protocols. I don't have to worry about learning the new manufacturer's protocols, or did they change it from this series to that. If it's Crestron connected, it's a standard series of control protocols. On the Fusion side of things, it means it can be connected directly to Fusion, right? So it can either go through the processor, through that architecture, right? And have the processor can report all that stuff up to Fusion, or it can be connected directly to Fusion to report that data in a standard way. So the way you know if a projector is Crestron connected is it'll say it's Crestron connected. There's usually a little logo on there. Somewhere in the manual will be somewhere about Crestron connected. It's built right into the projector. Most of the DLP projectors in the world are Crestron connected at this point.
Great, and I'm sharing the results because we are running really long.
Yep, it's fine.
So let's get and go through. You can see here that most people look at the AV manager with priority, IT manager, followed by facilities managers, workplace technology, human resources, and of course, some folks said none of the above.
Perfect.
All right, great.
Yep, great. All right, so let's walk through a couple of use cases here. And these are really pulled directly from the specifier guide that we have been referencing over and over again, just to kind of give you some ideas of how this stuff could be used. So audience AV manager, and the report is help requests and tracking help requests. And what tracking those requests could possibly reveal. Which rooms generate requests? What are the most common requests? And those two things could help us understand what's wrong, right? Is there a problem with any particular room? Is there a problem with any particular set of equipment, right? A group of users, perhaps. Maybe there is a an opportunity to improve the ease of use in these spaces. You know, if the request is frequently, I don't know how to turn on the projector, then there's obviously some opportunities to help streamline that process, whether it means automating with an occupancy sensor or just making it easier on the UI. Who responds to which request? So now we've kind of moved into a people management thing, right? So data that we have provided as AV vendors is now enabling managers to manage people and understand what their skill sets are, who's responding to these things, right? Who is most productive, who isn't. That can help managers help manage their staff more effectively. So what does that involve to implement? We need Crestron Fusion. You need a control system, as we've established. You need a touch screen or other input to help generate those help requests. There is a lot of capabilities for two-way conversations on touchscreens in Fusion, but here we're just talking about some canned messages like I can't get my presentation on the display, a projector won't turn on, you know, real canned messages. And the reason you used canned messages is now you have consistency, and I can track that over time, right? I can track all the ones that were this message and all the ones that were this message by keeping them the same, and include the SSI help request and response module in the programming. So that is something that would need to be defined up front. More information in the specifier guide. Example 2, the AV or IT manager. Usage tracking, device usage, right? This is going to be critically important to understand how people use the technology when it comes time to deploying technology in the future. So which technology is actually needed? I've got our favorite 2 cables here, a VGA cable and an HDMI cable. How many VGA cable or VGA inputs and DVD players do you think have been deployed over the years that were underutilized, but were just based on anecdotal information from the past, right? No, our instructors still need this stuff, I promise. And maybe that's true. That could be true. But with actual data, you can prove it, right? If someone's telling you an anecdotal story that I need VGA still because so-and-so instructors need it, but you show reports that say it's only used less than 2% of the time, maybe it's not worth that cost, because adding VGA does add cost to a system. Does VTC require 2 screens? How could we distill that? If we understand that users are frequently sharing content in their VTC calls, then they're probably going to want 2 screens, one to show the content, one to show the far end participants. If we just have a single screen, that's great for just basic, you know, collaboration in huddle spaces. But if they're frequently showing content, you're probably going to want that second screen. But this is a decision that can be informed by data and information. Do people favor wired or wireless? You get the idea. What goes into that? Again, Crestron Fusion control system, equipment that can detect and report sync. Crestron does that sort of thing, and the selected source. And the programming, we need to track that. We need to understand what the currently selected source is. Is there sync there? What is the current source being displayed? Logic to determine active use, and some SSI modules, device usage module, scheduling awareness module, so we can track it against room book times versus non-room book times. That is also an important part of that conversation. When people just walk in and start using the space, how do they use it? When people book the space, how do they use it? Tells us a little bit more about our audiences as well. And finally, room utilization. This is, you know, something that exists right now today, right? People have been talking a lot about people counting and understanding room densities and things like that. And there are ways, obviously, to bring those custom things into Fusion, right? If it's not a sensor we offer today in the ceiling, it's something we're definitely working on. If there's another system that can provide that information and there's a way to get at it via some sort of API, then we can bring it into Fusion, as Tim showed you, okay? But here, just based on how people use the rooms, right? If I see that, you know, room A is being used overutilized, and I see that rooms B, C, and D are underutilized, there's an opportunity for management to intervene and set up some parameters for how these rooms get used to enforce some spacing. Okay, so that exists right now today, but we need to have some idea of how the rooms are being used, both in booking and occupancy. So if I haven't made the case for including occupancy sensors in most of your designs, I hope I've made that clear. That one bit of information is so useful. And what goes into that? Again, Fusion. You don't necessarily need a processor just for this bit of data. Obviously, you need it for all the other wonderful things it can do in certain spaces. But in this case, if I just have a scheduling panel and an occupancy sensor, I get this data, okay? So it doesn't necessarily need a processor and programming scope to accomplish this. Okay, and it really is just a matter of configuring the Fusion to connect to the scheduling service, and the occupancy data is going to come along with it, including automation like decline for no-show. That's all going to be between the occupancy sensor and the scheduling panel. That's all that needs to exist for that function to happen. Oh, 10 minutes after the hour, people didn't show up, release this room back to inventory. So we did talk a lot about the specifier workbook. This is where to find it. It's crestron.com/fusion. Go to manuals and guides, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom. That's where you're going to find this guide. It does include the use cases I just mentioned and many, many, many more, and talks, at more length about what's required to stand up those examples. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to security. It's kind of an important thing here. We get questions on it all the time, and when you are having these conversations with end users, first thing they're going to ask is a whole bunch of questions about security with these systems. And it's not uncommon to get these, Excel questionnaires with a bajillion questions about how these systems interact on a network. I would recommend starting at security.crestron.com. That is going to answer a ton of questions for both Xio Cloud and Fusion. Okay, it's going to talk about what ports need to be open, what's talking to which direction, which protocols are being used, what services need to be available, outbound connections to servers if it's in the cloud, what needs to be whitelisted if we need to allow only certain outbound communications, and so much more. So start your search at security.crestron.com. Some amazing resources there. If we do get one of those questionnaires, it goes to secrec@crestron.com. It's going to create a case. It's going to be assigned to an individual. Give it some time, right? Because we got to, depending on the complexity of that questionnaire, it's going to take some time to get that back. Okay, so give us time, a week or two, to make sure that we can get all those questions answered accurately. I'd like to wrap up here with a little peek into the future and what the future holds. We've talked a lot about Xio Cloud and where it is today versus where Fusion is today, and what the future looks like, mostly for Xio Cloud, because that's really what's going to evolve the most from here, right? One of them is partnerships with popular manufacturers. So we talked about the architecture being an IoT model, meaning the device itself needs to communicate with Xio Cloud. So we are currently in partnership and active development, and hopefully we can name some names in the not too distant future. But these devices, namely displays, will be able to communicate directly with Xio Cloud as a direct Xio Cloud compatible device. While I am on that thought, I want to show you something real quick. People have asked in the chat, how do I know what an Xio Cloud device is? Go to any device. Right down here, there's going to be a little cheat sheet matrix for what that device does with Xio Cloud features. Okay, so this is a scheduling panel, does a bunch of stuff. If you want to see detailed features on just about everything, click on this detailed features link right here, and that is going to bring up a comparison chart with all of the compatible devices and what you can expect it to do in Xio Cloud. So that's, again, on every product page that's compatible with Xio Cloud, you're going to get that little cheat sheet. So I just want to show you that real quick. Additional sensing abilities for in-demand information. The most in-demand information right now is going to be number of people. The Huddly does have that ability to count numbers of people. We can see that number in a real-time status right now in Xio Cloud. What we're going to be doing is improving the reporting and alerting for that, right? Be able to give you some metrics on that, be able to base some alerts based on that. Okay, Huddly IQs, as you know, are included in the dual display flex kits, and they recognize faces, not like as individuals, but that there's a face there, and it can count them, right? So it can say, if there's a room with a capacity of 10 and you want to limit it to 5 in the foreseeable future, then we can have some alert based on, oh, it got up to 7 or something like that. Okay, that's something we're working on in the not too distant future for the reporting part of it. API enhancements for external data gathering. We didn't really talk about it much, but there is an API built into Xio Cloud where I can request status on a device, and it's going to dump everything that device is doing right now. Okay, that can be certainly parsed out and displayed in any number of ways. I can write it down into a local database for querying later to create my own historical data and my own analytics down the road. We're going to be improving that API going forward. More and more comprehensive product support. Again, if you were familiar with Xio Cloud a year ago versus Xio Cloud today, you know that the product support is far richer today than it was a year ago. The things you can do with a touchscreen these days with the remote control and the real ability to directly manipulate those devices from the cloud is pretty incredible. Room-based metrics is a big change coming in the next couple months. Right now, everything that Tim showed you is kind of at a device level. Here's what this AM200 is doing right now. Here's what all the AM200s are doing. Here's the historical data for all of the AM200s type of thing. But we're going to be able to correlate this device is in a room and this device is in a room and kind of give you a room snapshot. So that's going to be a big improvement coming this summer. More information on that in the not too distant future. And finally, big exciting thing. This kind of increases that overlap with what Fusion can do. So if you're not familiar, we have Crestron certified drivers, a vast library of them at drivers.crestron.io. By virtue of bringing one of these Crestron certified drivers into the program in the future, the driver itself will be the virtual manifestation of the device. Okay, so if it's a third-party device that doesn't have native IoT capabilities to Xio Cloud, we'll be able to virtualize that with its virtual instance in the program by way of the Crestron certified driver. So again, a little bit more overlap into what Fusion's capabilities are down the road, okay? So I just want to leave you with one final thought real quick. You are already poised to be your customer's richest source of workspace data. You already have more touch points in the room than any other vendor. Let's take advantage of it. And with that, we will wrap it up and tee up next Tuesday's session, which is MNE-202, Secure Design Principles, 11 a.m. Eastern.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Tim. I apologize. We went extremely long, but it had a heck of a lot of information to cover. Really do appreciate everyone sticking around. Most of our audience has stayed for 2 hours and 10 minutes, so that's phenomenal. Thank you all. All the questions and answers that we did not get to live, we will be getting a report out to everybody. So we do have that, and that'll get to you guys early next week. To explain something very clearly, Fusion requires a control processor to be able to collect the data. That's what Tim was explaining, is if a control processor can control multiple rooms and provide information on multiple rooms. VC4 works with Fusion. One of the questions is, will our GLS, our new power over Ethernet sensors, work directly with Fusion or not? They will work through the scheduling panel to track information. They will work through the processor. And there are conversations to bring it so that they will report directly occupancy data to Fusion, but not today. They are able to be deployed via XIO. So that is clarification on that one for a couple of people that came through. So we will get all the remaining questions answered. We thank you again for your time. We really apologize for going really long, but hopefully you enjoyed it. You learned a lot from it. We will see you all, hopefully, and then some, starting on Tuesday, May 19th for Secure Design Principles. We're going to go in depth on how to design a secure facility for your customers. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for our support team on the back end, and Muthu and Sherry and Carl. We appreciate all your time. Have a wonderful time. We're going to stop our recording and we'll hang around for a little bit as well.